It's a project that I started in 2016 as part of the cultural program of the Netherlands presidency of the European Union, and in Amsterdam, and I continued the same project, let's say working on the same project as during my residency at the Van Eyck. And the project was also actually kindly supported by the fictional journal, which Sophie is a founder and editor of. And in this project, you'll see how archaeological methods were appropriated to kind of inform, like a fiction, a speculation on the both present and future of the European Union, at least its presence in its aesthetics and presence in our cities. So the starting point is that Europe, of course, exists somehow. It is real, but at the same time, it's hardly graspable as an actual thing. And so I started to look for those objects and things and sites that kind of materialize. Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. That kind of materialized the post-national political contracts. But I was not looking for things that we have in common across Europe, of course, but more for objects that assemble us somehow because we disagree on some important matter. Quoting Bruno Latour, we don't assemble because we agree, look alike, feel good, are socially compatible, or wish to fuse together, but because we are brought together by divisive matters of concern into some place in order to come to some sort of provisional makeshift disagreement. And these places could be public spaces or parliaments or even, like elite meetings in the Alps. And the starting point is actually, the other starting point was the opening of the House of European History in Brussels, next to the European Parliament, where the European Commission commissioned actually a curator to come up with a selection of objects and documents through which the history of the European Union could be illustrated. But I mean, as we know, the history of Europe is mostly a history of conflicts between nation states, occupation one after the other, and so on. And so this kind of idea of destiny, historical destiny, has to be constructed also through fiction. But these fictions are not less real because they are made up. They are equally material and equally present in our everyday life. In fact, one example is here, the euro banknotes, which we are all familiar with. They are, when euro was introduced in the early 2000s, there was, let's say, like a big debate about what to put on the banknotes, how to illustrate the economic unity, if not a political unity yet, of the Union. And they decided to do it through architectural drawings. And but what's interesting is that these architectural drawings are of fictional constructions. So on the back of 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, and 500 euro banknotes, you see a series of bridges that kind of illustrate civilization, like the progress of civilization in Europe from Roman and antiquity to through the Middle Ages and Neoclassicism, through modernity and contemporary, bridges in the last big banknote. But these bridges don't exist anywhere in Europe. They are just ideal representation of what European narrative should look like. So this is already just like an example of how architecture and fiction can work together in the construction of a narrative. Mm-hmm. And in the context of the Netherlands presidency of the European Council, I built a sort of canopy, a hut in Amsterdam, just outside the area where the official meetings were taking place. And I built a hut with material salvaged from the then recently cleared migrant camp in Calais, in northern France, the place where economic migrants, mostly from and refugees without the actual refugee asylum, were living, waiting for a lift, basically, to cross the European border, the Schengen border, to the UK. And under this canopy, I organized a series of events and collected objects, political objects and contentious objects. And among the performances, for example, here you can see a Belgian artist who performed the European pop song together with the audience, improvising, basically, a fictional anthem for the European Union that kind of built on the Europop and Eurodisco cliche of the 80s and 90s. During the residency at the Van Eyck, taking also this quote from Georges Bataille as an inspiration, in which he says that it's evident how monument can inspire social wisdom and arouse veritable awe. He basically looked at the French Revolution uprising and the take of the Bastille as an act inspired by the material presence of the Bastille in Paris. Like it was not just a symbol of power; it was the materialization of power, and that kind of made it possible to for the crowd to emerge, to form around something. So I chose a series of sites and monuments in the European Union that I could go and look at, like from close up and in detail. And this was the first one, the Euro sculpture in Frankfurt. Jolt is probably familiar with it. It was placed in the 90s in front of the European Central Bank, and it was financed by basically an association of private companies and other cultural associations and so on, and it was gifted to the European Central Bank. But then the bank moved outside of the city, they left the monument behind, and the association had to go back and take care of the monument. They had to pay the electricity bill and substitute all the plexiglass sheets and the LED lights and so on. I went, but what's interesting is that when it was built, the monument became the symbol of European unity somehow, and in the early 2000s it became the symbol of financial violence instead, and financial control from Germany onto the southern states, for example, because of its presence on the media. And then in 2012, it became the symbol of Occupy Frankfurt. This is a picture from Armin Linke. Like that monument made it kind of made that site, which was not the site of the in front of the European Central Bank anymore, a suitable site for the occupation and for the settlements of the tents and so on. So these waves of representation and appropriation and domestication is what makes this monument interesting to me. So I went there and I made a 3D scan of the objects, and then made a series of prints and video using basically the 3D faces of the polygons generated during the 3D scanning. And in this case, for example, this was for the fictional journal article. I recreated the space, the media space of the European flag with the 12 stars, but I instead of having the flat symbolic representation of the stars, I used the material objects, like the actual objects that I scanned in Frankfurt. So you see, for example, the broken corners of a few stars. You see the bumper stickers, the tags, also the written with black markers, and also like these aesthetics of I don't know. It also looks like a digital relics. So I wanted to play with ambiguity in time as well. It's not clear whether it comes from the past, because it's a ruin, it's a relic, or from the future, a future when that monument is kind of I don't know, ruined or destroyed somehow. And then I also got in contact with the association, and I found the place where the original plexiglass sheets were stored in Frankfurt. So I went there and I shipped them to Maastricht. These are the actual stars from this monument. But the first one, because they were substituted in 2005 because they were too dangerous and fragile. And I installed them in my studio for a while. And what you read actually on it is a dedication. In 2015, the association who owned the stars tried to get rid of them and sell them on an auction. So they asked sports person, TV personalities to sign them. And so this is like another layer. No, I mentioned earlier that there were waves of appropriations from like the media, and then the occupiers of Occupy Wall Street, and then like this is just another layer on the palimpsest of these stars. And it's interesting. What they wrote is on the first sheet, immer weiter, like always further, like is this idea of ever greater integration. And on the back side, on the other sheet, they wrote empathy. Yeah. And but like this fieldwork was also conducted in other sites. We just make another example. These are on the right phone-absorbent panels from a meeting room from a building in Brussels. So we always think of monument as let's say material objects in urban space that can retain information about past events and the past in general, and kind of inform our identity. And I took this literally, like this notion literally in this case. I took phono-absorbent panels, like panels that absorb discussion in meeting rooms in office building in Brussels in the European district, and showed it as a like monument almost. And these are safety glasses from another building in Brussels in the European district that was refurbished a few years ago. And I went to a warehouse just outside the city to collect them once I found out where they were. And I recomposed the facade, basically a glazed continuous curved facade, which is the kind of aesthetics that we associate with the European Union. But again, making it ambiguous, because it's, it really is from a ruin, like a ruined building that was refurbished, but it's of course like a modern or contemporary image, architectural image. So through this fieldwork and archaeological excavation almost, the intent was to play with reality and fiction and past and future and so on. And also I made molds of tiles from this square in Maastricht, which is named after the signing of the Maastricht Treaty. And I made copies of these tiles, but so it's like forging Euro tiles from the original mold. And so this was just an example of how fieldwork and fiction and architecture can somehow inform each other. And another example that Sophie already mentioned is Shore Leaves. It's a project that's currently on show in the Dutch pavilion. So if you're in Venice, you can go and check it out in person. And there, the idea was fiction. The fiction of rhetorics, the fiction that basically informs our current understanding of how automating technologies are changing labor conditions. And so the dominant idea now is that machines are freeing us, or let's say workers, from labor. They're saving, like they're freeing time from labor. And so we went to see what this time looks like. This time freed by machine looks like aboard of cargo container ships and bulk carrier ships in the ports of Venice and Rotterdam. So again, it's a field work, but the starting point is the fiction of rhetorics. This is the trailer of the movie. Can you hear the music, the sound?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so the sound, yes, but it was recorded on aboard of one ship when where one seafarer from Kiribati, the guy you saw at the Casio keyboard, was playing songs from the islands, actually. And so we went aboard these two ships and we tried to look at these at the waiting time, basically the time that's actually freed by automating technologies during the hours that ships are harbored in the ports. So in the past, seafarers used to have maybe like at least 1 or 2 days to spend in the ports, and they could go ashore. They could go to the Seafarers Club of their country of residence, for example. They could get in touch with their families, with their friends. They could also, they could spend time outside of the very much contained space of the ship, without, for example, the white noise of the ventilation system and the roaring sound of the engine that's always on, and so on. And now instead, because automation is making the pace of loading and unloading, the pace of logistical handling even faster, they only have a few hours. So what's happening is that they only rarely can go ashore. So they mostly stay on the ship, and they receive the help of cooperatives and associations, Seafarers Club, on the ship. So in port cities like Rotterdam and Venice, there used to be clubs in the city center, for example, for Norwegian seafarers, or for, German seafarers, Italian seafarers, and so on. Now these clubs are mostly deserted because seafarers don't have the time to go there anymore, and it's the duty of the associations and cooperatives let's say, to go on the ship and give the seafarers support SIM cards so they can use the internet and connect to their families, or the possibility to transfer cash money to their families, and so on, because they don't have connections when they are at sea. So we went on board and we looked at these spaces when at the control rooms, at the engine rooms, and the kitchen, where actually the chefs work 7 days per week, and from the morning until after dinner. The common room where they get connection, but it's actually useless. The changing rooms, which is the interface between working space and leisure space, or working time, leisure time. The actual Seafarers Club in the ports, where they can use SIM cards and they can buy phones. We also made interviews, but I think it's hard to the audio doesn't work unless I unplug my earphones, but then it's too bad. So I will just skip the interviews. And this is what you can go and see also in the Dutch pavilion. Mm-hmm. It's like a 2-channel installation with the spaces and the gestures of these waiting hours. And for example, the gym, which is the space where they can exercise after work, but it's it's always empty. The dining room, the kitchen, the stores with exotic products in the port, mm-hmm. The bike, the captain's bike. Every time they're harbored, he tries to get away like as much as possible from the noise of the engine room. This is one Filipino guy from the crew watching a game for, I don't know, maybe the 20th time, because they don't have connections at sea, so they watch the same games again and again. And another problem is legal for the crew, which is mostly composed of non-European workers. It's very hard to go ashore if they don't have short-term permits. And that's another issue. This is why they tend to stay aboard the ship instead of going ashore. It's much easier if you're European. That the guy you saw is from Scotland, so for him it was easy. Again, the gym. Darts, they play karaoke. So yeah, we documented these moments. And if you go to the Dutch pavilion, or if you've been there already, it's the 2 video thing on the bottom right corner. And again, I mean, another way you can look at this as fieldwork that informs fiction, rather than the fiction of rhetorics that inform our fieldwork, is through the words of the captain, who said on that ship, who said that the logistical world of seafarers is the avant-garde, the preview, the laboratory, basically, of what awaits us in the motherland, or in the inland. So yeah, that's it, I think.
Cool. Thank you, Paolo. Very good. Very interesting. Any questions? Maybe we give them a moment to process their thoughts. I was wondering about shore leaves. Is it so? Basically, it was like an observational exercise, more or less, and then like using film as like a tool of analysis. Is that kind of correct, or?
It was an observational exercise. Yes, it was like in immersion in the everyday world of seafarers, but. with the rhetoric of automation in the background and as a starting point. And there's no, I mean, we didn't have any. It's a visual essay. You can also say it's impressionistic in a way, because it's not. I mean, there's no scientific analysis. Of course, there's no. We didn't quantify anything. It's just like a visual impression of the few hours that seafarers can spend harbored. Yeah, during the loading and unloading activities that are mostly carried out by machines like automated cranes and so on.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, what did you think of this year Biennale's theme, subject, the free space, how it relates with the specific work you did, and have you been to the Biennale this year? And if you saw any other parts of exhibitions that you thought were like interestingly put in the subject of free space.
Yeah. Okay. So the theme of the yes, I was in Venice last weekend, I think, and so the theme of the Biennale, as you know, is free space, and I was initially very skeptical because I don't think such a thing exists. I mean, space is never free for anybody. And for example, I don't know, in another project that I did with Giuditta, we looked at laws that regulate the use of public space, which is what we often think of when we think of free space. Now, free space is open space, public space, and so on. And public space is not free at all. I mean, it's always the property of someone, and it's always managed by someone, and there are always rules on the use of that space. So even open public space is not free for anybody. And the same critical approach, I think, is evident in this project, in Shore Leaves. The time supposedly freed by machine is not free. Okay, it's always confined. It's always, I mean, it's even reduced by machine. Free time is even reduced because the loading and unloading activities used to take 2 days, and now they only take 4 hours. So seafarers only have 4 hours to go ashore. So this is what free time, the time freed by machine looks like. It's even, I don't know, less meaningful than it was before machines were introduced, automation was introduced, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, there's no final statement on this, but... and another pavilion that I really, one pavilion that I really like in relation to the concept of free space is the Chilean one. And I think theirs was the most, I mean, I don't know, like the most striking answer to what free space can be, because I'm probably you've been there. They rebuilt like an illustration of the stadium in Santiago del Chile, and they documented a series, like 3 or 4 moments in the history of Chile when the stadium was used as a sort of political assembly or site of spectacle, and they also recall the moment when Pinochet, the Chilean dictator, basically gave space, an ownership of space to the citizens, like the inhabitants of Santiago, and basically indebting them for life. So this is what free space meant for the Chilean people. No? They didn't even have basically free space was given to them, common space that used to be common. Was privatized and given to them, but that meant that they were then indebted for life. So
I think we have time for one more question. Somebody has something? No? Okay. Do you have one?
Hi, Paolo.
hello.
Thank you very much for your presentation again. I would like to ask you about the European flag, actually, European research, where you reconstruct the European sculpture on the Frankfurt. As an object, it represents the country, and I'm always questioning to myself what represents the nation, what represents the land of Europe or the land of the other countries. In this view, I want to ask your opinion about the biennials. Because it's, your intervention, gives a kind of how can I say, opportunity to reconstruct, to rethink about the borders, nationalism, and everything. Maybe it would be nice also to talk about through this intervention about the free space and the borders of the countries, how we're going to represent in the future, or how can we reconstruct, maybe not even only for Europe, but worldwide, what could be the next.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Yalta, for making a good point and the question. So yeah, I chose the Eurosculpture because of its popularity, because it actually succeeded in becoming a representation of the Union, and also because it succeeded in being appropriated by alternative alternative, let's say, publics. Okay, so it was initially an institutional representation of unity, monetary unity. Then it became hopeful, like the symbol of hope and of political union. Then it was appropriated, and then it became the symbol of financial violence, and then appropriated by the Occupy Frankfurt protesters. So and this is what I like about it, the fact that it really lent itself to a series of détournements also, no? And in the case, but it's also very clumsy. It's also awkward. It's an awkward object. It's not like the elegant symbolic symbol of which nation states have many examples. No, so there are many examples of and monuments dedicated to, I don't know, like the nation in France, and these are beautiful. Like but these ones that are trying to do the same for Europe are very. They are awkward. They're clumsy, and this is also what's interesting. And I also think that they relate. I'm not sure. I don't know. For example, I'm thinking about biennials. Biennials have, of course, also these. I don't know. They call for national outposts outside of the territory of the nation. No? So at Giardini you have the French outpost, the German outpost, the Turkish outpost, the Brazilian outpost, and so on. And in Giardini, but also around the city, because the space is not enough anymore. And I don't know. And looking at shore leaves, one parallel that